circumstances. And we get mad at God when things don't work out the way we think it should. And so we have been looking at what Kyle Idleman calls the aha moment. That's that moment basically when it's like you have that, you're trudging along and all of a sudden it just like a light comes on. And suddenly you realize that there has to be a change. There has to be a difference. And we've talked about over the last couple of weeks using the prodigal son to look at that aha moment. That moment where God suddenly drives it home and we have to make a decision based on what God has shown us. You know, when we saw the prodigal son last, he was feeding pigs. And he was so hungry that he even wanted to eat the pig slop. But he had to be brutally honest about his situation. He realized that until he admitted that something had gone wrong, he wouldn't do anything at all. He would just sit there and wallow in his slop. And in some sense, it's what we do. We know there's a problem. We don't like where we are, but we're not willing to admit that we need to make a change, that we need to go back to the Father. We've wandered away and we've decided in our heads somehow or another that we don't have to make a change, that we can be just like we are and not change at all. But when you go back to God, there will be a change. You will walk away different. And that's what an encounter with God brings, is it changes you. It changes me. And that's exactly what happens. The prodigal son realizes that until he admitted that something was wrong, he couldn't do anything about it. So far in his story, we've seen two of the three crucial ingredients of aha. A sudden awakening and a brutal honesty. And that's all great. But if we stop just there, all we are is on an emotional roller coaster. Oh, I know there's something wrong. I really screwed up. And then go back and do it again. Well, you can't stop. I mean, it's great and it's wonderful and you should be brutally honest. You know, and there needs to be a sudden awakening, a realization that this is not where I should be. But if you stop just there, if you don't go any further than being honest, you're going to go right back into it again. I have a friend of mine who likes to look at the Lazarus story, and he talks about Lazarus gets done, and and they had a celebration all day, and Lazarus goes back into the grave, wraps himself in the grave clothes, and goes back in the tomb to spend the night. Yeah. He makes the decision to go back to where he was because he's trapped in that grave, that tomb type of mentality that says that, yes, I know there's something wrong. I was dead and Jesus raised me from the dead, but I kind of like it in here with the worms. And I kind of like it in here in the stank tomb and the dirty bedclothes and all that other stuff. And so he's going to hang out in the grave. And see, that's exactly what the prodigal son could have done. Well, I kind of like the pigs. And maybe I'll get used to pig pods and pig slop. I know there's something wrong here. I know that I don't belong in this. I don't want to be here. And I know that I'm the one who brought myself to this point. I admit that I'm the one. I can't blame my mom. I can't blame my dog. I can't blame my boss. I can't blame my sister or my wife or my kids. I'm the one that dug this pit that I'm dug myself into. And so you can't stop. I mean, yes, you have to admit it's wrong. You have to admit where you've gone wrong. But you also have to determine the difference between that there has to be an action plan. What are you going to do? What's the next step after you've been brutally honest with yourself? There's a sudden awakening that you're not where you're supposed to be and you're supposed to be back to God. You've got to act on it, right? There has to be an action plan. And because that determines the difference between a sad story and an aha story. So let's look at Luke chapter 15, verse 17. We're starting at. And then he came to himself and he said, how many hired servants of my father have enough food and even food to spare? But I am perishing and dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Just make me like one of your hired servants. Look at what 21st part A says. So he got up and came to his own father. He had a sudden awakening. He came to his senses. He had to be brutally honest with himself and the consequences he deserved. And now, if he wants to be truly have an aha moment, he has to act. He has to do something. Because unless you act, you won't have aha. Unless you act, it really just an emotional roller coaster. Let me put it this way. And I'm going to give you an outlandish example just to make so that this makes sense. One day I decide that I'm eating too much and I need to lose weight. And I look at myself in the mirror and I say, man, you're so fat. You've got to get rid of this weight. You're going to end up dying. And I look and see, and I'm really brutal honest with myself, and I realize how fat I've gotten, and and then I pull the scales out and I look at how heavy I've gotten. And I say, okay, I decided today that I'm going to lose weight. And then I go in the kitchen, and there's a cheesecake in there. So I pull the cheesecake out of the refrigerator, and I sit down and says, but I'll start that tomorrow. And I'll eat the cheesecake. Oh, next day, they're... And the next day, oh, no, I don't have time for it today. And I put it off again. See, I've been brutally honest, and I knew where I was, and I knew what I needed to do, but I keep putting it off. I keep deciding that I'm not going to do this. And we do that with sin. We allow sin into our lives, and then when it comes and we confess to God, oh, God, I'm wrong. Yeah, cheesecake is sin. That's right, Celine. Cheesecake is definitely sin. Unless you eat it at a Baptist church, at a church potluck. No food served at a church potluck has any calories. Just remember that. That's why it's good to be a Baptist. Sorry, I couldn't resist that one. Oh, please, Bill, you're not helping. I'm glad I ate dinner before service. Because you've got to make the choice to actually do something about it. If you have allowed yourself to get caught up in sin, and I don't care what the sin is, and you know what where you are is wrong, but it's just so tempting to go back to where you were and do it again. And you come to and you realize, man, I can't believe I did that. I can't believe I'm in there. If I would just stop this, if I would just walk away from it, if I would just turn this over to God, He can give me victory. But what I end up is defeat. Because I decide that number one, I either try to do it in my own strength or power, or I really don't mean what I say. I'm not really willing to change. You have the sudden awakening. You have the brutal honesty. You've hit the wall, and you know where you are, and you know where you need to change at, and you know what's wrong, and you know what you do to change it, and then you refuse to turn around and go back. It's kind of like this. Do you guys ever use those things they call Groupons? I don't know if you've seen Groupons. But here's the work. You sign up, and they email you every day with a new deal. You get a coupon. And you have to buy the coupon from this website, and it can save you a lot of money. Every once in a while, there's something worth your time, and you can save a ton of money on stuff like restaurants and vacations and jewelry. But the thing is that when you get this email, if you see some great deal and get really excited about it, and you really want to buy it, and you have to buy it then, and the next day the deal is over, you can't just see it, want it, realize it's a great deal, and then close the email and hope that the money's going to magically appear in your bank account. You actually have to act on the Groupon. You don't act, you don't get it. If you don't act, you don't have that aha moment. Not really. I think that it's the hardest of the three ingredients of aha to get. It's hard to be brutally honest with yourself, with others, and with God. But translating that into action is one of the most difficult things in the world to do. Like when you look down on the morning after Thanksgiving and you see the number on the scale, and you know you don't like it, but it takes people until New Year's to finally make a resolution to do anything about it. And even then, it never lasts. You know, one of the problems that we have in this country, and I assume in other places in the world, is we've allowed porno into our houses in terms of our computers. And if you have a problem, then you've realized it. You know, I have a problem. And you admit it. You say, oh, man, I've got a problem, Pastor Mike. And I've had people come to me and say, I've got a problem with this. And we talk about getting an accountability partner and helping them find somebody to help them keep their eyes in the right place. But they don't share everything with the accountability partner. And that computer's still sitting there. And they end up going back to it again and again. Yes, it is, Bill. Because they admit they've got a problem. You know, there's a sudden awakening that there's a problem there. They're being brutally honest with themselves. But there's no about face and go back to God. And so they keep going around in that circle. Well, yes, I'm sorry I got caught doing this, but, you know, and I really shouldn't be doing this, and I know it's my fault I'm doing this, but I just can't help myself, and I'm going right back to it. And they go right back to it again. And again. And again. But the prodigal son in Luke 15 realizes that he can't stay where he is. You know, you cannot follow God and stay where you are. You can't. And I'm not necessarily talking about you have to go to foreign countries or go to be a foreign missionary somewhere. That's not my point. You cannot stay where you are spiritually and follow God. Because God will transform you. You will change as a believer. You will be altered and transformed. And you will not be the same person when God gets done with you that you started out with when you first started. And some of us it takes a lot more time for. But he realizes you can't stay in the same place. And so what does Luke 20 say? He got up. And actually, the sentence there uses one Greek word. And that's what's interesting is that the same Greek word is also we translate as resurrection. He was resurrected and went back home. It literally just means get up. See, the prodigal son didn't just stand up and start walking. He got up out of something bigger than just a pig pen. He got up out of the sinful life that he'd been living. He got up out of the bad habits and the mistakes he had made. He got up and out of something bigger than the pig pen. And getting up can change everything. He resurrected. He had hit the wall. He was in the pig pen. He had lost everything. He was so hungry that he was actually thinking about eating the pig slop. And he could have chose to stay there. Well, you know, learn to like pig slop. Yum. Right? But he chose to get up. Getting up can be the difference between divorce and mending your marriage. Getting up can be the difference between struggling with an ongoing addiction and freedom. Getting up is the difference between giving into peer pressure and staying from that stuff you swore you'd never, and staying away from that stuff you swore you'd never get into. Getting up is the difference between continuing to feel alone and forgiving that grudge that you've held on for so long. I was reading, and what's funny is there's a satire newspaper called the Babylon Bee. If you ever read it, it's pretty funny stuff. But I was looking at it today, and there was a little side link about a news report. And they made a really big deal out of it because it was their wedding day. And this girl was writing, and she said, you know, I realized I was all excited about the wedding. And my mom comes to me and says, your fiance wants to see you. And so she let her down, and she sat down around the corner of one room, and he sat around the corner, so they couldn't see each other because it was a wedding day thing. And he reached out and they held hands. And she said, I was sitting here thinking, what a great boyfriend I have, what a great fiance I have. He's going to be such a wonderful husband. I'm really excited. And he says, this is a big day. Can we start it by praying together? And so they started praying. And they spent the first moments before the wedding ceremony praying together. And she said, as she got done with that and they went back in and putting the final touches on the dress, she looked down and she realized, it dawned on her that she was wearing a white dress. And she said that fiance was part of the reason she could wear white. She was still a virgin. And that fiance had started from the very beginning that we don't want to put ourselves in situations where we're tempted to violate our purity. And so they made sure that if they had to be alone, that there was always, visible, that they weren't left in places where they were tempted to do anything. They came to realize that maintaining that purity was what was most important. That they were going to go into that wedding vow pure before God. See, they chose to be obedient. They chose purity. They could have not made a plan and just let things go, and they would have ended up stumbling somewhere along the way. They decided that God was going to be the center of their marriage. That's getting up. That's making a decision that, hey, I'm not going to let myself fall down this path. I'm not going down this road. I'm not going to allow myself to look at the garbage on the television. I'm not going to allow myself to listen to my friends at work with the vulgar language and the profanity and all that other garbage and sit there and laugh about it with them. I'm going to walk by faith, and I'm going to get up and obey. So the question for you tonight is, what does it take to get up? Because unless you act, you don't have aha. You're sitting in the pig pen, wallowing in the slop, saying, oh, poor woe is me. I deserve to be here. I did all this to myself. Oh, poor woe is me. Whoa, whoa. I'm in the pig pen. I got myself here. Feel sorry for me. And God is saying, repent and return home. That's exactly what the prodigal son did. And I think in order to get up, you have to know three things. First, you have to know where you are. Just like the son had to be brutally honest about his situation, he had to understand that staying there was unacceptable. Aha takes an understanding of what life can be. Aha takes an understanding of the power of God. Because if you don't know or don't believe that God truly has something better for your life than sitting in the pig pen, why bother to get up? Well, I don't understand, God. I begged you for such and such. I begged for a wife. I begged for a wife, God. And yet, you didn't give it to me, so I'm going to go out and fool around. I'm going to watch porno on the computer or the television. But I'm going to keep begging you to give me a wife when I'm not willing to turn around and go back to where I'm supposed to be. I'm happy in my sin. I'm happy breaking your heart. I'm happy in the pig pen. Woohoo! I like the pig pen. Lots of mud, lots of slop, lots of pigs. And if you don't believe that God has something better for you, you can stay in the pig pen and you won't care. You know, when a kid is a senior in high school and they would do just about anything to get out of the house, get out of high school and go to college, that's because they know no matter how good it might have been here at the house for the past 18 years, with everything provided for him, home-cooked meals, mom doing their laundry, they know that it is just time to leave. They can't always say why, but they just know. There's something in them that just says, being here is not okay anymore. I have to get out. And that's what it takes to get up. You have to go beyond honesty. Here I am starving to death, and realize you don't have to starve to death anymore. When you know where you are and you know what you don't have to stay here, it makes it possible to get up. God, I have broken your heart. I have violated your law. And I ask your forgiveness, and God forgives you. I can go back. I can repent and return. And that's what repent means. It means to turn around and go back. Go back home. Get out of the pig pen where you put yourself. Stop running away and turn around and run home. The second thing you need to know is you need to know where you're going. Here's what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that you have to have all the answers, but I am saying that you have to know which direction you're going. It does make things a lot easier. Personally, I'm directionally challenged. I can sit out on the front porch and I hear thunder coming, and I'm looking at it. Oh, it's coming from the west, and I realize the storm's coming from the east. I'm horrible with directions. Thing is, you got to know what direction you're going if you're going to get there. Look, guys, you can wander around lost all you want, but if you're in the pig pen, you need to know, number one, you need to get out of there. You need to know what's in store for you. And number two, you need to know where you're headed. You can't just wander off in another direction. And that's the only place to get the right direction, Bill, is right from Scripture. And that's why it's so important to read it. That's why it's so important to understand it. That's why it's so important to memorize it. When the prodigal son got up, he knew where he was going. Back to my father's house. I doubt he knew really exactly how long that journey would take him. And I doubt he knew exactly what he was going to do for food, water, or shelter while he was traveling. But he knew that he had to get back to that house. He didn't know how the place might have changed. He didn't know what his older brother might do. He didn't know exactly what his new way of life would be like. But he knew it would be better than the current one. So he got up. And when you have an aha moment, rarely if ever will God let you know exactly what's going to happen from that point. But if you know where you're going, and if you know that what God has in store for you will be better than anything you've ever had, you can get up. It may not be easy. It may be the hardest thing you ever have to do. But when God gives you an aha moment, He wants you to come home. In the Old Testament, there's a story of Jacob. Jacob, his original name means heel grabber or deceiver. That was how he was named because he came out of the womb a few seconds after his twin brother Esau, holding on to Esau's heel. But the word also means cheater, liar, or deceiver. And he had that encounter with God. And man, you got to be tired if you can sleep on a rock, and that's what he was doing. And he had some bad dreams while he was sleeping on the rock, and God shows up, and he wrestles with him till morning. God finally says, and demonstrates, and he touches him on the hip, and he walks away limping. He walks away changed, and he has the right direction to go. He was running away from his problems. He turns around and goes right toward them. He heads right toward his brother. I always think I'm glad God has a sense of humor, because if you know the story, He left his wife and kids and everybody that he cared about and his servants and all his stuff on one side of the river, and he went on the other side of the river. So he had all these people in between him and his brother's forces because he figured his brother was coming to kill him. After all, he had cheated his brother, and he had lied to his brother, and he had deceived his brother, and he had stolen from his brother. And he gets there. He has this moment with God where God changes him, and he gets up off the rock and goes to his brother. He goes to where God sent him. And he gets there, and his brother falls on him and cries and kisses him and is just excited to see him, and he loves on him, and he wants to know what all the gifts are for because he doesn't need anything. You know, Jacob had changed because of what God had done through him. When God gives you an aha moment, he wants you to come home. It might mean saying, I don't know if I'll fit in right away at church, but I know I need to go. It might even mean saying, I might lose all my friends if I quit partying, but I know I don't want to live that way anymore. It might mean saying, I don't know if she'll ever forgive me, but I know the Bible says to be honest. It might mean saying, forgiving my mom might be the hardest thing I've ever done, but I know that I need to forgive others the way Jesus forgave me. When you can see past the present into the future God has for you, it makes immediate action possible. And when you know where you're going, when you know the end goal, it makes it possible to get up. You need to take the immediate step. Don't put it off. Don't prolong it. Don't roll around. I don't know, that's not a word, but close enough. Lollygag. Yeah, lollygag around. You need to get up out of the slop, get up out of the pig pen, and go home. And third, you have to know who's waiting for you. Look back at Luke 15:20, where it says this. And so he got up, and he came to his own father, but while he was still a long way off, get that? While he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was moved with pity and tenderness for him. And he ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son started to say, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. I no longer deserve to be recognized as a son of yours. And the father said to his bondservants, bring quickly the best robe, the bestest robe of honor, and put it on him, and give him a ring for his hand and sandals for his feet, and bring out that wheat fattened calf and kill it, and let us revel and feast and be happy and make merry. Because this son, my son, was dead and is alive again. He was lost and now is found. And they began to revel and feast and make merry. This father obviously would have known his father, but there is no way he could have expected this. Can you imagine? He's sitting out in the field. He's been practicing the whole way. Dad, I know I've sinned against you. I know I've done this wrong. I know I've messed this up. Please forgive me. Treat me as a servant. I am no longer worthy to be your son. And he's been rehearsing that the whole way. And Dad, what does Dad do? Dad doesn't say, well, yeah, you deserve it. No, what does he say? He runs to him, wraps his loving arms around him. Yeah. While he was still smelling like the pig. Remember, he'd been in a pig pen, guys. It's not like he stopped at the Holiday Inn and got a shower on the way over there. And then cleaned up yet. He was been walking for however long that took. But the dad loved him. Where was the son's punishment? There's none of that. There's only a celebration. And even before the son got all the way there, the father ran out to greet him. And you got to understand that was not normal. In order for him to run, he would have had to hike up his garment, or else he would have dragged through the dirt. And for a father, a grown man, to do that, especially for a son who was so disrespectful, would have been unheard of. This really was indignity for the father. But he throws his social customs out the window and taboos out the door, and he runs to hug his son. No one listening to Jesus could have ever predicted this, and exactly why Jesus told the story. Because that farmer is the father. And he sees us coming from a long way off. He knows that we've been in the pig pen. And he knows we've been at the bottom, at the end of our rope. And we know that we've reached the end of ourselves, and we've admitted that we're sinners. And we need saviors. And he knows that we've been brutally honest with ourselves, and we've looked at our lives, and we've realized that we have failed him. And we've rebelled against him. And we've betrayed him. And he also knows that we repented and came home. Jesus tells us about a father who waits patiently and eagerly for us to return to him. Jesus tells us about a father who would do anything to see us back in his house. Jesus tells us about a father who would suffer unimaginably while he waits for his children to come home. And now we know who's waiting for us. Aha begins with us, but it ends with God. And when we take our life, our money, and go off to a distant country, God lets us go. He lets us make the decision to leave. He makes the decision, lets us make the decision to abandon our family, to treat people unfairly, to throw our lives away in sin, to pursue our own selfish desires, to try to fill up the emptiness in our lives with drugs or porn or alcohol, or work on sports or TV or video games. It starts with us. But when we say, I've had enough, I don't want to starve to death anymore. I don't have to starve to death anymore. I'm going home. Then it all ends with God running out to meet us. I don't care where you've been. I don't care what sin you've allowed yourself to fall into. It's never too late to go to the Father and say, I have sinned against you. Forgive me. And God will. No matter how far off that distant country is, God sits on the front porch, staring off in the distance, waiting. He hasn't given up on you. He doesn't give up on me. He doesn't get used to it. You gotta get tired of it. He doesn't go inside to watch the television program. He waits. And when you move beyond a sudden awakening, beyond brutal honesty, and you go home, God runs to meet you.